Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, author of the second edition of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio manager and financial advisor in Edmonton. Hilliard, welcome back to the show.
Nice to be on your show.
Hilliard, the hot topic, of course, right now is hints of Western separatism, or perhaps more than just a hint. And one of our listeners, Andrew, asked us, what would happen if it looked like separatism became real in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and what would that do to real estate?
Well, that's a great question. Ever since this, I guess the hashtag is Wexit, W-E-X-I-T, and I think it stands for Western Exit, but the most of the impetus seems to be coming from Alberta. I don't think BC is particularly joined into the movement yet, and possibly Saskatchewan is involved to some degree. I saw a report last week that mortgage defaults in Saskatchewan are rising very rapidly, and there's more mortgage defaults in Saskatchewan right now than there are in all of British Columbia, and British Columbia is 5 times bigger than Saskatchewan. So, and obviously the house prices in Edmonton and Calgary have been sliding for quite some time now, several years in Calgary and more than a decade in Edmonton. So the latest exodus from Alberta, primarily in the oil patch, is really starting to bite into the economics of housing in Alberta. So regardless of whether the Wexit hashtag takes off, the housing market in Alberta is in for tough times, but I don't think it would help, for sure. One of the things that I talk about in my book quite a bit is household debt. And if everybody bought houses and paid for houses with cash that they had on hand, there wouldn't be any real boom and bust cycle in housing. But the fact that there's so much debt attached to housing, and the leverage so high, for first-time buyers, it can be as high as 95% debt. Any kind of a slippage in the price of houses can put a lot of people into trouble. But that's just part of the equation. The other part of the equation is the willingness of the banks, most of whom are domiciled in central Canada. Their willingness, which has been really strong up until recently, to help people get into massive amounts of debt with almost no down payment. If that changes to a reluctance or a downright refusal, the housing market could come down, even though it's already come down quite a bit in Alberta and Saskatchewan, or especially Calgary, could go down a lot more, because the new buyers still need that loan. And now there are a couple others, the Alberta Treasury branches, that might step into the gap, but they've got their own problems in terms of loan losses now. So it would probably be devastating to answer the question if it looked like that movement was really catching fire, because undoubtedly the national banks, none of whom are domiciled in Edmonton or in Alberta or Saskatchewan, would turn the taps off for a while. I don't think they would be permanently turned off, but they would turn them off for a while for sure.
Mm-hmm. And of course, what about people's pensions? What would happen to the pension money that's in Ottawa or not in Ottawa? And would people continue to get their payments in Alberta and Saskatchewan if they separated?
That's a That's a tough question. I know that Quebec has sort of their own separate pension plan, and but I also know that people that qualify for the Canada Pension Plan, they can live in Mexico, or some of them do. They can live elsewhere and still receive their pensions because they paid into it, and they, by meeting all the qualifications of it, they've earned the right to receive the Canada Pension Plan payment. So, if the jurisdiction that they're in happened to no longer be part of Canada, I don't think that would impact their ability to receive those payments. But there's another thing, and I don't think people in Central Canada, well, I know they're not aware of this because I've talked to many of them. People don't realize what a significant portion of the economy Alberta and Saskatchewan makes up. So even though the population of Alberta is only 11% of Canada, the GDP is 15%. So it's quite a bit heavier economic activity than the average of the rest of the country. And not that long ago, CMHC mortgages, new mortgages being issued, were up in the 23% of the total rate. So it would be a devastating blow to all of Canada if Alberta were separated. More likely to be what's going on here is that the people that are upset are trying to get more attention from Central Canada. They don't want to be taken for granted, kind of thing. So, and it's similar to the movement in Quebec. It's been quite a few years now. I remember at the time when they had the referendum in Quebec, the people said, well, they don't really want to separate. They just want to get better recognition for their situation. And now I don't know if that was true for all of the people that voted to separate, because the vote was very close. But a significant number of them probably just want to send a message, and maybe that's what's happening. But the bigger problems Alberta has, this is a distraction from the bigger problems which more relate to the oil and gas industry.
Well, also, too, oil and gas is probably the whole thing, and why they also think they'd have a strong economy if they separated. But you still have the issue of how do you get that oil and gas to a foreign market, and if you have an uncooperative British Columbia, which would now be a foreign country, do you think that they still haven't really thought that out? And how do you get the oil and gas out?
Yeah, and there isn't really there's a few barrels that are going through the Trans Mountain to Vancouver now, and there's a big expansion. I think it's a $5 billion expansion or something like that would, I think, triple the volume to about, I think if it were completed, it would be 750 or 800,000 barrels a day. But there's 3.5 million barrels today going to the U.S. So really, the big thing is the U.S. and whether the Trans Mountain is ever completed or not. And the U.S. So unrelated to all of this activity with pipelines and rail cars and pipelines to the West Coast and tankers leaving from Burnaby, there's just the issue of the fundamental issue of, does the U.S. actually need our oil? And the problem there is that they just recently was announced that they had a month, probably September, I think, maybe October, where they actually exported more oil than they imported. And somebody tweeted a graph that showed that the Saudi Arabia exports to the U.S. had dropped all the way down to 177,000 barrels per day, and but it didn't mention that Alberta and Canada, and it's mostly Alberta, are still exporting 3.5 million barrels a day. So the U.S. imports about 4 million barrels a day. 75-80% of that comes from Canada or Alberta, and but now they're starting to export oil, and for the first time ever, they exported slightly more than they imported. So for now, the Alberta exports are probably safe because they go to refineries that are set up to handle heavy crude. It's a complex refining challenge, and the refineries have been set up that way for a long time. for Venezuelan crude, Saudi crude, and Alberta crude. And the new oil that they're finding, mostly in the tight oil in Texas and North Dakota and other places, the light oil is not, it doesn't fit well with those refineries. So that's why they're exporting 4 million barrels and importing 4 million barrels, because the refineries aren't set up properly. But over time, does it really make sense to export and import the same amount? They could easily, over time, the refineries could be converted. And the thing is that oil that they're getting from the Permian Basin in Texas is very light, sweet crude oil, which means it doesn't take much refining, doesn't take much processing. It's much higher quality than the heavy oil that we're selling to them. And so in the long run, we're very vulnerable for these exports. And so what we really need to do is start thinking about what's going to be our follow-up gig. If this gig is over, we need a new gig. And I don't have a suggestion for that, but I do think it's an urgent problem that we need to face. And whether we separate, whether Alberta separates or not, doesn't make any difference. The problem is still going to be there.
Hilliard, one of the oldest energy companies in Canada, is now fleeing the country, leaving its head office in Calgary and heading south to the States and Canada. What's behind that? And should Canada be concerned about other companies following in their footsteps?
So it's a big deal, I think. First of all, people were surprised about the name. I think the new name is called Ovintiv. I have no idea where they got that from. But the original company was called Alberta Energy Company, and they changed their name to Encana, and then they split then they merged with a company called Pan Canadian Petroleum, and that's when the name Encana came out. So it was Alberta Energy Company, and Pan Canadian became Encana, and they had two divisions. They had the heavy oil division, and they had the natural gas division. So then they split that company into Cenovus, which was the heavy oil, and Encana, which was the natural gas. And natural gas in Canada has been terrible lately because they can't give it away. It's that bad. They literally cannot give it away. So the natural gas division, which was called Encana, which is soon to be called Ovintiv, has moved to the U.S. where they've got a better chance of. I don't know that their chances are really that good in the U.S. either, but they think it's better there than. And the reason they gave was they can't get any investors to invest in the company in Calgary. So maybe that's true. Cenovus is still, doing quite well. I mean, relatively speaking, still all of the oil companies are way down on their share prices, but Cenovus is one of the ones that seems to be surviving, if not thriving. But when they were first founded, Alberta Energy Company, they got given an amazing array of assets from the Alberta government, and then Pan Canadian got given in the 1800s a wonderful gift from the federal government through all of the oil and gas rights to the lands around the Canadian Pacific Railway. So it's kind of a sad day to think that they couldn't make a go of it, even though they were given all those advantages right out of the gate.
Another thing, too, that you've noticed is car sales plummeting, and are electric cars getting any kind of foothold at all?
So the car sales, we don't know yet. It's just pretty new. The last couple of months, car sales have really plummeted, and just in the last 24 to 48 hours, some of the Japanese companies like Mitsubishi have reported some shocking numbers of car sales dropping. And it could be the car sales cycle. So the car sales cycle peaked out a couple of years ago in the U.S. at 17 million cars, and it's not going to make that. Every month the sales are slightly lower, and one of the possibilities is it's a recession that's coming. It's one of the pretty accurate predictors of recessions is when people stop buying new cars. Another thing could be electric cars. So the thing they call the Osborne effect. The Osborne effect is like when you've got your iPhone and you know that Apple's coming out with a new iPhone in next year, And so you decide not to buy a new phone, even though you need a new phone, because you're waiting for that next technological update. And that could very much be happening with combustion engine cars. People are thinking about going to electric cars. They're waiting for the electric car that they like and that they can afford. And they're thinking that, actually it's true. The price of Teslas has been coming down ever since I bought one. So waiting in this case actually pays off. So if that's true, if that's widespread, and it's happening in China too, car sales in China are which is putting on a very aggressive push on for electric cars, have been dropping as well. So whether it's the cycle, whether it's a recession, or whether it's people waiting for the electric car that they can afford, there's something happening there, and maybe the next time we talk we could revisit it, because it's a pretty big deal. I mean, between housing and cars, these are the two biggest items in your consumer spending portfolio for most households.
Well, they've done surveys as well. To millennials, cars don't mean what they used to mean to fellows like us who grew up and couldn't wait to get their first set of wheels because it meant independence. Now, with a urban-based population, if you have effective transit or work right near where you live, like they do in Vancouver, where ride-sharing and co-op cars are big, owning your own vehicle isn't what it used to mean. Plus, they have bills that we never had when we were growing up. We didn't have cell phone bills, and we didn't have cable TV bills at the same age. Yeah,
I think, having a car, I mean, the average car payment in Alberta, I was told a while ago, I'm sure it's correct, is something like $700 a month. I mean, if you could save $700 a month, if maybe you're working 3 jobs, one at Starbucks and 2 other jobs, $700 a month is such a big number that, if you could eliminate that, why not? And I was doing an interview in Toronto, and the interview was out of the core of downtown Toronto. I had to travel quite a ways. And, so I took an Uber, and, we're driving along, and I noticed the subway and the street line, the streetcars right there. And I said, did you get much business, like on the Uber, when people that live in these big towers, can just jump on the streetcar or the subway? And he said, well, millennials, he said, they wake up, but they don't get up early enough, and at the last minute they just order an Uber. so it's so easy. You don't need a car. You don't even need a subway. You could just order an Uber.
We'll have more with Hilliard MacBeth right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth, continuing on the idea of Alberta and Saskatchewan separating. You did some research when this was a hot topic back in 1980, and what did you find back then?
So they had the first thing I could find. There were several movements, but the one that had the most success, I guess, was the Western Canada Concept Party, which was founded in 1980, and in a by-election in 1982. In Old Didsbury, which is kind of the heartland of central Alberta, Gordon Kessler was elected for that party, the Western Canada Concept Party. Now, there was another group, I think it was called the Western Canada Independence Party, led by a different guy. And what happened to Gordon Kessler was he was mostly upset about, believe it or not, I was surprised myself, about converting to the metric system and federal bilingualism being imposed on Alberta. So those I think people are still upset about bilingualism, but I think people have kind of gotten over the metric thing. But the other group of separatists, they felt that once Gordon Kessler got elected, he became too soft on separation, and so they didn't back him, and so he was very badly defeated in the following election that came up a little while later, not that long after that. But no other separatist party has ever been elected to any legislature that I could find in Alberta or Saskatchewan. He was the only one, and he didn't last very long. It was a by-election. Somebody stepped down. I can't remember. And at that time, there was Soul-Creds, which were kind of the old Ernest Manning party, and then there was the new Progressive Conservative Party under Peter Lougheed. And so nowadays, I don't know what form it's going to take, but obviously the emphasis is going to be more today is going to be more on economics and money, and things like the equalization payments and other grievances like that. But I was involved in the 70s in working for a brief time before I became a stockbroker. I worked for the Alberta government in the Intergovernmental Affairs Department, and we had a visiting delegation from Japan, and they were looking at investing in the oil sands, which they eventually did invest in the oil sands, and I was involved in hosting them and talking to them and stuff. And somebody asked them, "What do you think of Canada? What do you think the future of Canada is?" And the Japanese, through an interpreter, said, "There's too much conflict between the federal and provincial governments in Canada, and that's holding you back." That's what he said. So, it struck me at the time. It was like 1975 or 1976 or something, and it's like that turns out to be very accurate. Like we're wasting so much time worrying about things like Alberta versus Ottawa and Alberta versus Toronto and stuff. We're a small country. We're very dependent on exports. We're very dependent on commodity exports, which is a problem right now because the commodity cycle has been over for some time now. And we urgently need to get our act together. And just fighting with each other doesn't really get us any closer to figuring out what we're going to do.
Well, don't forget, interprovincial trade barriers are costing the economy $60 billion a year. The provinces don't even allow tradespeople from one province to the next to work, in the same country.
Yeah, I remember when the breweries, I forget how it works, but the Molsons and Labatt's had to have a brewery in each province because you weren't allowed to ship I might have gotten this wrong, but
yeah, that's still the case.
It's still the case. So, I mean, we got all these, and it really, these provinces are kind of artificial. I mean, 1905, Alberta wasn't even a province till 1905. And so it's a very recent thing. And at the time, it seemed important that we have these governments and the different issues that came up were quite local. But in today, in the 21st century, it's more like cities are way more important. And so I don't know. It's we got a lot of level government in Canada. We got a very small population, and if it looks like it might happen if the export of oil and gas dwindles and we don't have that money coming in anymore, we're going to urgently need to find something to replace it, and that's not going to be tough. Building condos in Toronto and Vancouver isn't going to be enough to keep us going for very long. So we need to find something new.
We'll have more with Hilliard MacBeth right after this.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlan, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the 2019 drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth. Hilliard, are alternative lenders being a little too loose with their cash, and do they have enough money on hand to cover defaulting loans and mortgages? As you said, in Saskatchewan, defaults are way up.
Yeah, so the epicenter of well, there's several facets to it, but the one that came to my attention recently was one of the companies, Equitable Group, it's called, in Toronto. They're quite a large alternative lender. They're not really a bank as such. They do have a bank subsidiary, but they make loans, and they generally, like Home Capital, there's two of them, Home Capital and Equitable Group. They basically make loans. If the bank turns you down, go to Home Capital, go to Equitable, and in both cases, their total loans are around 20 to 25 billion, somewhere in that range. So yesterday, Equitable Group reported their results, and they had $3.5 million of provisions for credit losses, which is 5 basis points. So it's 5% of 1% of the total assets or total loans that they have, which doesn't leave a lot of room for any loans to default before they get into trouble. Now they could have reserves. It's not quite the same thing as reserves. Provisions for credit losses it's a complicated thing. We don't need to get into the details of it, but to give you some idea, all banks have losses. All banks or all lenders have borrowers that can't pay them back. And my thesis is that this housing bubble bursts. We're going to find out there's a lot of people that have bought houses with very large mortgages that can't really afford to own those houses, and I'm pretty sure that's going to turn out to be right. So whoever's in the lending business in Canada is going to be in trouble. And it doesn't even have to be mortgages. It could be credit cards, auto loans, or Canadian Tire has one of the biggest financial services companies in Canada, lending money to people who want to buy stuff at Canadian Tire. So, and all of those things get affected. So to have a mere $3.5 million of reserves against more than $20 billion, I think it's like $26 billion of loans outstanding. It's ludicrous. To give you an idea, the banks, I haven't checked lately, the banks' results don't come out until December. But a while ago, last time I checked, the average for the banks was like 30 to 40 basis points. And the banks generally are, I think they're going to get into trouble with their mortgage lending, but I think everybody agrees that they're more careful and more prudent in their lending than the alternative lenders like Equitable and Home Capital. So how is it that the banks have 30 to 40 basis points in loan loss provisions, and companies like Equitable and Home Capital similar only have 5 basis points? So that means the banks are 8 times more worried about loan losses than the alternative lender. It's just crazy. I think we'll see. I mean, as long as the treadmill keeps going, I guess we won't know. But when the music stops and there aren't enough chairs for everybody to sit on, we'll find out who's left. Or as Warren Buffett says, when the tide goes out, it's only then you find out who's swimming naked.
Hilliard, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Nice to be on your show again.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, author of the second edition of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. By the way, Hilliard, where can you get the book?
You can get it at any of the major bookstores and independent bookstores, and you can also order online from more and more people are doing that through Amazon, Chapters, on your Kindle devices. It's available in all those things. The only thing I would mention is make sure it's a second edition, which is got the red cover, and it came out in 2018.
If you have any questions for Hilliard or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.